Have you ever wondered why you start to pull back when things start to feel a little bit emotionally close? Or in other relationships, no matter how much you invest and give, it always just feels like you stay on the surface level? Maybe you feel like you are one step away from achieving a goal, but you always seem to sabotage yourself. What is really going on behind the scenes? My name is David McCormick, doctor in psychology and executive coach. And in this video, we're going to be walking through the ways that we tend to self-protect in our relationships and even with our goals, and how this self-protection actually turns into self-sabotage. This sabotage can be with any kind of connection, with meaningful work, with meaningful relationships, with purpose, with anything of value in our lives where we want to and need to be connected. There are certain patterns of behavior and beliefs and attitudes that trip us up in a predictable way, and we can learn to walk in a different way so that we are not sabotaging ourselves at every step. And by the end of this video, you will understand better why we do this, how it's rooted in our early attachment experiences, and how you can start to create safer and more authentic connections. And this kind of awareness that we're talking about today is what I would put into the relational domain of our whole life audit, which is a framework to evaluate the core 7 areas of life. One of the most important things to understand about human development as we dive into self-protection and self-sabotage is that we all have an innate tendency to keep ourselves safe. And this is not an objective keeping ourselves safe, is that we want to feel safe in every kind of situation that we're in. Obviously, primarily physically, but also emotionally, psychologically, and relationally. In my own life, I discovered that when people raise their voice, I tended to feel very unsafe, even if I was safe in my environment. And still today, when I hear people raise their voice and get angry, there's a part of me that just shuts down because I start to feel like I'm not safe. And so to pursue my sense of feeling safe, I do not surround myself with people that yell. I know there's different people in my life that tend to yell, and when I can see that they're getting upset, I run. I'm out of there because I cannot take the way it feels when they're yelling, because it makes me feel so unsafe. But all this to say that we tend to utilize learned strategies to keep ourselves feeling safe when something in our environment makes us feel like we aren't. So I want to share with you some concrete examples of what this could be looking like in your life right now. Areas of your life where you have learned strategies to keep yourself feeling safe, but that actually end up keeping you disconnected. One can be overanalyzing instead of feeling. When information comes to us, our natural sense is to have an emotion of what's going on. But when those emotions feel uncomfortable to us, some of us learn that we can intellectualize those feelings, which is we can think about it and analyze it without actually feeling it. And this can be helpful and useful in certain situations and for short periods of time. But when we utilize this way of thinking for a long period of time, we're sending all of our emotions up to our brain, and our brain only has a certain capacity to understand what's going on, because we were not created just to think, we were created to feel. And there's information that we cannot think our way out of. We have to feel it and we have to go through it. Another way we see this come up is utilizing humor as a way to deflect any kind of vulnerability. And I'm sure you've been to a funeral where you've seen someone that is laughing and cracking jokes and having a really good time. And for the person that's grieving and actually going through those emotions, it feels so insensitive. And we just can't believe that someone would be making jokes at a funeral. But it could be that they are utilizing humor, a learned strategy, to cover up the uncomfortable feeling of sadness that they don't want to go there. They don't want to feel vulnerable. And so they're looking for other ways to mask themselves and distract themselves from feeling what the moment would merit. Another one is just to shut down or to completely disappear when conflict arises. And there are lots of reasons why we do this. Maybe conflict has been kind of traumatic for us in the past. But if you see someone that is completely shutting down, you want to have a serious conversation, and that person probably could just fall asleep. And this has happened to me a couple of times with conversations with my wife where she says, I need to talk to you about something. And I just feel this wave of tiredness wash over my body. And it's a way that I'm trying to get out of this conflict, out of this uncomfortable conversation, or out of this confrontation, and my body seems to take over and it just shuts down. This is a learned strategy, and it becomes a physiological response to the conflict or potential confrontation that's coming. But we have to go beyond just recognizing these behaviors. And we have to recognize that they aren't bad in and of themselves. They were adaptive. They helped you survive emotionally when connection didn't feel safe. So So it's important to take a step back and put on a lens of attachment theory and understanding our primary caregivers, how they interacted with us, fulfilled certain needs, neglected others, and what we learned in that process. As children, we learn what love is through consistency, safety, and responsiveness. And when we find these things in our caregivers, that consistency, that safety, that responsiveness, we will learn to feel safe in a variety of situations and have good coping mechanisms when we don't feel safe. Coping mechanisms that don't disconnect us from others while keeping ourselves safe, but can maintain authentic connection in the middle of feeling uncomfortable. When love was unpredictable and not consistent, that could lead to an anxious attachment where there's going to be over-functioning and people-pleasing and all these different behaviors that are going to compensate for that feeling that we had on the inside. And on the other hand, if love felt intrusive and overwhelming, or if tough emotional things were completely avoided in the household, then we could develop an avoidant attachment where we're going to fall into withdrawal and an exaggerated sense of independence. So often our attempts as adults to self-protect stem from our strategies that were learned when we were children and how we thought that we could be safe in the middle of really uncertain circumstances. So the paradox here is interesting, that the patterns of behavior that once kept us safe and were functional and brought us that sense of safety are now keeping us separate. So how exactly does self-protection block emotional intimacy and connectedness? We come to interpret closeness as a threat, and when someone has intentions to get to know us or to serve us, we are always thinking, what are their ulterior motivations? What is really going on below the surface? I am sure that even though they may seem nice, they really want to do me harm. Another way is that we don't wait for rejection to happen. We preemptively retreat before we even get the sense that we could feel rejected. And so we're opting out of relationships when things get a little too close and there is a possibility that there could be rejection or abandonment. And another way that self-protection blocks emotional intimacy is that we manage other people's emotions instead of being in tune and revealing our own emotions. Sometimes it can feel easier to try and control other people's emotions instead of sitting with our own. And when do you feel safest? When you're open with other people and have them close, or when you're in control, or where there's always an escape route, or where there's always a contingency plan and you can always get out of a relationship before you start to feel unsafe. So I want to provide you with 3 practical steps of how you can walk through this and not let your current protective strategies get in the way of emotional connectedness and intimacy. Number 1 is to name your pattern. Everyone has a pattern. If you don't think you have one, it's because you are not aware of it. And with awareness comes choice. When we are able to name something, then we are able to mold it. I would encourage you in this step to do some journaling, to write down, when was the last time I felt unsafe? And you may be so used to the way that you are responding and operating in relationships that you're not even aware of the moments where you feel a lack of safety, but they're there. Take some time to journal through this and write down, wait a minute, when this happened with my boss and he mentioned this subject, or when he made this kind of gesture, or when I was at the store and someone interacted me with this way, there was this sense of a lack of safety and I responded in this way. And again, this isn't always negative. We should be keeping ourselves safe in relationships, but with those that we trust and want to build intimacy with, we have to let ourselves get close. And number 2 would be to practice vulnerability. And vulnerability is a word that gets thrown around a lot and is not always understood, but it is the sense of feeling like you are exposed and what that feels like on the inside. And we need to walk through those feelings if we're going to have any kind of intimacy, because we need openness to achieve emotional intimacy. So I would encourage you to start with something really small. In the mornings when you are used to saying, everything's fine, I'm doing great, maybe there's a day that you feel a little off. If you could just say, I feel a little worried about this situation. And maybe your spouse will look at you like, what is going on? This must be really big. And maybe you need to provide some structure around that and say, hey, nothing is really crazy or off. I'm just trying to grow in my vulnerability. And I do have this sense of I feel a little bit worried. And so I want to vocalize that. I want to say that to you instead of keeping that on the inside and maintaining this facade like everything is great. While that may seem like a small step, it is a powerful one to achieve a sense of intimacy and take a true step towards the other person in a posture of openness. And often when we expose ourselves in that way, where we say something small and we're vulnerable, we realize, A, this wasn't so bad, and B, I actually feel a lot better having named what's really going on. And language is powerful not only to communicate emotion, but also to manage it. And in line with this vulnerability piece, another way to retrain our nervous systems towards the sense of safety is to expose yourself little by little. And I've had to do this with certain relationships where I know, because of the history of the relationship, that I'm going to be psychologically safe in this relationship. But there are certain behaviors that trigger me feeling unsafe. And so what I've begun to do is to notice the sense of discomfort in my body and walk through it. To breathe, to take a deep breath, and maybe ask myself a question. Do I need to run away from this? Is that the best option? Am I safe in this moment? To try to bring in a little bit of objectivity to contrast the subjective fear that we feel when we feel like we're getting into an unsafe situation. And number 3 is to retrain safety. And this is an important one, but it does require that you have someone else to retrain with. Because what was broken in relationships needs to be healed in the context of relationships. One of the best relationships we can do this with is God, because He doesn't change and He's always there. But when we can grow in this sense of engaging in vulnerability and learning firsthand that we can do small things and we can do vulnerable things and feel safe, then we're rebuilding a definition of what safety is. That safety isn't keeping ourselves separate from emotional intimacy. Safety comes to mean I can be present in really difficult situations and not lose my cool. And I can be present in really uncomfortable situations and still have the sense of groundedness because I've done the work to get there. And when we engage with families or individuals with the whole life audit, it is an important task to define what safety feels like for them, and also to take those steps of vulnerability in a controlled situation. That's where coaching is such a powerful tool, where we can engage with individuals and encourage them, help them to take small, vulnerable steps in a safe setting so that they can understand and retrain what that safety feels like. So to sum things up, self-protection is not your enemy. It was a valuable and important tool that you learn in a moment of life, but it is not helpful anymore. The self-protective measures that you take today can be keeping emotional intimacy at bay. They're not bad strategies, they're just outdated. And I want to challenge you with this question of what would it take for you to come to a place where feeling seen and feeling known also feels safe. And the goal with this isn't to tear down all our strategies in one day and just get over it. It's to slowly build up our capacity for love, trust, and genuine connection, one step at a time. If this content is helpful for you, I would encourage you to share it with others. You can check us out at mccormickconnect.com, subscribe to this channel, and I would encourage you to evaluate your life because it's already telling a story. Let's make sure it's the one you want to tell.